Depending or not whether your corporate job sucks, Jack Welch's name will send shivers down your spine or propel you to the floor in unwavering worship. There's no middle ground with this CEO. His legacy ranges from the genius who streamlined corporations through revolutionary management techniques to the fat cat who destroyed the American business landscape by making life worse for employees. Then there are those who say he ran a bona fide cult so steeped in capitalist fever that even Ayn Rand would have cringed. He retired with a $417 million severance package, the biggest ever at that point in time. That's enough to raise the eyebrows of even his most dedicated disciples. Yet, he always saw himself as fighting for the little guy. He championed the efficient infrastructure of small business over the sluggish mechanism of big bureaucracy. Yet, he never shied away from defending lucrative bonuses for CEOs such as himself. Not even when firing scores of blue-collar factory workers. His paradoxes all stem from his expertise as a chemical engineer. A deep understanding of synthesizing opposing elements, creating catalysts, and measuring explosive outcomes explains how his methods for success have split people down the middle. You could say his business approach was capitalism's free radical. Reactive, energetic, but short-lived. Or was it? Am I just playing devil's advocate, or should we give the devil his due? Were his techniques always destined for downfall, or have other companies improved his formula? And did General Electric collapse because of him or in spite of him? Chapter 1. The Elements of Success. By the time Jack Welch entered the world in 1935, General Electric was already a household name for radios and irons and more. What started out in 1892 with founders Thomas Edison and J.P. Morgan had now grown into a cutting-edge corporation. But when Welch passed away at 84 years old in 2020, he'd leave behind a company that was unrecognizable to its founders. Not least of all, because of a few short years after Welch went to join the shareholders meeting in the sky, General Electric ceased trading. Welch was born in Peabody, Massachusetts. He was the only child of Grace and John, both of whom had Catholic parents from Ireland. The paycheck from his father's train conductor job provided a modest upbringing, especially now that General Electric's inventions were raising the standard of living across the nation. We're talking refrigerators and televisions, to medical equipment like CAT scans, and even military applications like submarine detection. Compared to the Great Depression that his immigrant family would have to struggle through, Welch had everything going for him. So it was probably this relevant comfort which propelled straight-talking Welch to get acquainted with hardship. His childhood stutter was the first thing he conquered. He thanked his mother for helping him because she convinced him that his tongue couldn't keep up with his intelligent thoughts. Then, throughout his middle school and high school years, Welch spent his summer caddying golfers, delivering papers, and selling shoes. These odd jobs brought him closer to the types of people and worlds he'd later deal with, though it was his academic side which became the catalyst for change. He studied chemical engineering at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, while summer interning at places like Sunoco and PPG Industries. The fact that he was getting placements at some of the big chemical industry players before securing his diploma demonstrates he was a cut above the rest. He made such an impression that, upon graduating in 1957, job offers from big companies were hitting him left, right, and center. Others would have jumped at this first sign of stable work. However, this young chemical engineer valued the possibilities of strategic risk-taking, so he doubled down on his talents by enrolling as a postgrad at the University of Illinois. When he left in 1960, the 25-year-old Welch had a master's, a PhD, and a wife. Kids really did grow up faster back then. He hit the job market scene bigger and better than ever, and immediately snapped up a junior engineering role at General Electric. But little did anyone know that signing a contract for his first real job would become a pivotal moment in history for American business, for better or worse. So it's time to learn how history works as we distill the corporate history of Jack Welch. This week's video is sponsored by NordVPN. NordVPN is striving to make the internet better than it is today, free from online threats, censorship, and surveillance, and they do absolutely everything to achieve this mission. With their server map, you can select from over 6,000 servers all around the world. When we're researching, we use it to see what sites say about the perspective of history in other countries, not just the Western perspective. But you can do much more than change your IP address. Their threat protection feature guards you every click while browsing, preventing you from downloading malware and those annoying pop-ups that flood your screen. Their dark web monitor scans hacker hangouts and immediately alerts you if your information is for sale. Don't wait to become a victim. NordVPN is my favorite VPN on the market, with tools to help protect you against phishing attacks, malware, ransomware, and much more. Get this exclusive NordVPN deal in 4 months extra by going to nordvpn.com/howhistoryworks. It's risk-free with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. Protect yourself online with NordVPN. Chapter 2. Power Surge. Over the next 20 years, Welch leapfrogged up the corporate ladder. Okay, I know I'm mixing up metaphors, but only to emphasize the point that his rise to the top was truly impressive. Especially that he almost got fired when a factory he was managing had its roof blown off in an explosion. Seriously, how many billionaires' rags to riches story have some wily coyote shenanigans? It's the type of laboratory mishap that would make Thomas Edison proud. Yet none of this would have happened if Welch had quit early like he intended to. Welch was dissatisfied with the corporate culture. He couldn't stand the amount of red tape. To him, wading through the office politics slowed down productivity and increased waste. So he threatened to walk, which was a bold move. This defiance marked the first time Welch's radical outlook clashed with the norms of corporate culture. Remember, this was an office in the 1960s. At this point in time, the cubicle was some far-off utopian ideal and not the dystopian wage cage us modern folk remember it as. So if you're feeling the strain from your open-plan office life of foosball and Mental Health Awareness Month, then spare a thought for what the mid-century office worker went through. Incredibly, his protest worked. An executive promised to instill a small company atmosphere if Welch stayed. Also, he got a raise, which apparently was the other reason he was prepared to leave. It seems his starting salary of $10,500 wasn't enough, even though by 2024 rates, that's at least 6 figures. I know plenty of millennials and zoomers who'd happily blow off the roof of a factory for that kind of cash. My point is, small business and big payout would go on to become the defining characteristics of Welch's business philosophy, not just in his organization, but in all other companies for the next 50 years. As for his climb to the top, Jack Welch pretty much hit every story beat in the typical CEO legend. The only way his trajectory could be more Hollywood is if he started out as the janitor. He made vice president in 1968, as well as headed its plastic division. By then, this division raked in $26 million for GE in what was one of its most competitive emerging markets. That's a lot of responsibility. He even oversaw the production and marketing for 2 big names in the polymer business. You guessed it, Lexan and Nori. As all of us polymer fans know, the latter was used to mold cases for the Apple II computer. No wonder he was selected to be the vice president of the company's chemical and metallurgical division in 1971. By 1973, he joined the ranks of group executives, and was now managing their medical systems and electronic component departments. His job title got longer, his responsibilities got bigger. In 1977, he was their new senior vice president, and by 1979, he was promoted to vice chairman. Then, just 2 years later, in 1981, Jack Welch was finally crowned General Electric's youngest ever chairman and CEO. Becoming the big cheese took just 20 years, and now he'd have 2 more decades in front of him at the helm, plus another 20 years afterwards to see the consequences of his actions play out. For now, Welch was free to run the company the way he saw fit, and the first thing he did when he got the keys to the kingdom was to undo the old kingdom's way of doing things. Chapter 3. Balancing Books and Balancing Equations. By the end of 1982, he had successfully removed every atom of the previous management's infrastructure. He was in electronics after all. Part of electronics is disassembling something so you can put it back together again in a more efficient manner. However, some critics labeled his strategies as aggressive simplification and consolidation. It's not hard to see why. In layman's terms, Welch figured out that the quickest way to save money and generate higher profits was to fire people. Now, that might not seem so big-brained in today's age, but that's only because we're living at a time where Welch's approach became the norm. For that, we can thank his vitality curve. That was the name Jack Welch coined for his version of the Pareto distribution, otherwise known as the 20-80 split. It's where 80% of an outcome is decided by 20% of an action. Kind of like how 80% of How History Works viewers are not subbed. But Welch went one step further with his 20-70-10 split. He laid out the details in his book, Jack, Straight from the Gut. The 20% referred to the best employee, the A class, whose work improved the business significantly. These guys were rewarded with bonuses like stock options, raises, and all the polymer they could eat. Okay, maybe not that, but there were plenty of big carrots on big sticks. The 70% was for the employees who did adequate work. These guys are the B class, competent, dependable workers. Maybe in the future they'd rise to the rank of A class, but would be fine where they are so long as they didn't drop into the C class. The C class weren't just the worst employees from a production point of view. They were toxic, they drained the energy from those around them, like an office Grinch whose pessimism zaps the motivation of hard workers. But it didn't matter what your position was or how long you'd been with the company. Being in the bottom 10% was like speed running for a pink slip. Even if you dodged the firing squad this year, there was always the next round of evaluation. No one was safe. This approach was so infamous that Jack earned the nickname Neutron Jack after the neutron bomb for his ability to wipe out people while leaving the building still standing. He enjoyed surprise visits to factories and headquarters just to make sure employees were doing their best to stay on his vitality curve. But it wasn't just Welch who had this ranking system. He instructed all his managers and executives to score their departments and employees according to a set of criteria. These calculations were processed through a series of questions and values, kind of like the world's first algorithmically driven workforce, except there was no solid empirical data. And he was the first to admit the judgments couldn't be perfect. But as cutthroat as it sounds, this method did carry the company through hard times. During his first year as CEO alone, the company recorded revenue of around $26.8 billion. At the height of Welch's tenure, GE was raking in $460 billion worth of revenue. As controversial as his management was, Welch's style was so popular that it still exists today, even if companies do it secretly under a different name. It has been estimated that between 12 and 30% of Fortune 500 companies still use his patented rank and yank system. Microsoft uses it, Google uses it, and of course, Amazon uses it to such an extreme that employees sometimes resort to relieving themselves in plastic bottles so that their computer boss doesn't mark them down a group. For example, the ranking system was easily exploited by office politics. A brown-nosing employee could hold onto a B or A status while a rival could sabotage a colleague to spare themselves from the chopping block. C-class employees could be bumped up to protect them from being fired if managers believed Welch didn't understand the value they brought to their teams. But there was also the risk of the D-class. Every time a C-class was removed, new employees would be needed. This gave managers two courses of action. Have no choice but to hire worse people because losing your C-class shrink your pool of candidates, or deliberately hire bad people as scapegoats to protect your favorite staff members. As you can imagine, plenty of analysts pointed out that this approach wasn't completely efficient. How useful could a strategy for efficiency be when it created a culture of cutting corners? And what about the short-term gains over long-term survival? Would that come to bite GE in the butt one day? Well, Welch had another ace up his sleeve, a way for people to change their minds about business. And himself. Chapter 4. Reaction Rates and Compounding Interest. The Fortune 500 eventually declassified General Electric as an electrical equipment company and reclassified it as a diverse financial services company. This infuriated Jack Welch. He severed all ties with any publications which viewed his company as an investment bank, but that's exactly what General Electric had become. You see, Welch developed a habit for acquiring or merging with viable companies in other sectors, stripping them of their resources, then dumping the husk and moving on to the next money pot. That's not uncommon when a business is moving vertically. But what made Welch's idea his most revolutionary one to date was focus on moving horizontally. General Electric started dumping its manufacturing components to set up things like General Capital Bank, General Capital Sponsor Finance, and a whole bunch of other money-lending businesses. And it worked. By 2014, General Capital had total assets of almost $500 billion. Soon, other companies followed suit. Amazon went from books to products to food. Apple went from computers to music to phones to TV. Look at Warner Bros., Microsoft, Activision, Facebook. They all copied Welch's structure for expanding by merging, acquiring, or diversifying their subsidiaries and portfolios regardless of what industry they started in. His influence was becoming so respected that he was able to set up a cult. Okay, it wasn't exactly a cult, and I'm not just saying that for legal reasons. Plenty of journalists and reporters had directly asked Welch whether his summer course for CEOs was a boot camp for company bosses or really an evangelical retreat to recruit missionaries for his worldview. He denied them, of course, but these concerns stem from a few questionable actions. The first was taking a training center set up by General Electric in the 50s and converting it into a members club complete with golf courses and jacuzzis, all things Class A employees would love. Second, he screened the students of his masterclass. Rather than to be open to anyone looking to succeed, he allegedly vetted candidates on how well they already agreed with him. But it was the third thing that many feel that proves that the cult of Jack Welch was real. It started when he spearheaded companies buying back their own stock. On one hand, he was diluting the power of shareholders. He had always hated bureaucracy and red tape. But on the other hand, this artificially inflated the stock value. The fewer stocks there are, the more they are worth and the higher the earnings per share. Even if other CEOs weren't signing up for his summer camps, the fact that they copied every step of his playbook proves that he was more than an idol. He was an ideal. His reputation was impervious to criticism. It didn't matter whether he was calling climate change BS or fighting New York State over his factories dumping chemicals into the Hudson River. CEOs weren't even fazed when he displayed contempt for his workers when he joked that an ideal corporation would be floated around the world on a raft to take advantage of tax breaks, loopholes, and cheap labor. Heck, even when General Electric was found guilty of defrauding the Pentagon of millions of dollars during some jet engine contracts, Jack Welch was still kept as CEO for 10 more years. By the time he did start retirement, Welch was able to negotiate a $10 million advance on the rights to his memoir, though he said he'd donate the profits to charity. Unfortunately for Jack, the undoing of his reputation and company was just around the corner. Chapter 5. Breaking Bonds. Jack Welch said that his leadership success of 20 years could be measured by looking at his impact over a comparable period. He'd come to regret those words, as post-Welch General Electric was characterized by steady decline and sudden collapse. It started with scandals. In 2014, General Capital agreed to pay the largest credit card discrimination settlement in history. They'd been denying consumer benefits and debt relief to Spanish speakers, and exploiting vulnerable groups like elderly customers, but consistently failing to communicate the fine print of their costs and fees. But a Welch fanboy would argue that this wasn't on his watch, so old Jack can't be blamed, even if he did set up the system and culture in the first place. Even Welch's handpicked successor went on the record to say the company structure was worse than he was led to believe. So what was Jack's defense? 9/11. He said that the destabilizing effects of the terrorist attacks affected production and revenue across all industries. But that's like saying if the wheels fall off your second-hand car the moment someone else starts driving it, the problem is the potholes in the road and not your shoddy maintenance. Even if you think I'm not being fair, you can't blame Bin Laden for the Great Recession. Suddenly, all the stocks and bonds propping up General Electric's finance operations weren't that impressive. All those Class A employees discovered their bonuses were worth a lot less, and that their ranking wasn't going to give them job security when General Electric began selling off divisions and assets to survive. Even when Welch wasn't firing people, employees were still losing their jobs. Worse, when Jack Welch divorced his second wife, his private finances were dragged into the spotlight. Courts discovered his payment deals with General Electric were a lot more lucrative than anyone realized. We're talking the use of a private jet, an apartment in New York, and even tickets to baseball games. So much for needing to close factories to save money. Then again, his defenders say that those bonuses came from the profits he generated. Even as recently as 2020, General Electric was ranked as the 33rd largest firm in the United States. Surely that says something about the longevity of Welch's leadership. However, just a few years later, the conglomerate was hemorrhaging money. Even a pivot to aerospace didn't help. COVID-19 affected the travel industry so much that the jig was up for General Electric. The empire had gone from A-class to C-class. Of course, Welch never took accountability for the decline of the company. His defenders say the fault lies with his successor's shortcomings, but critics cite his rewriting of the rulebook as a recipe for disaster. So the question remains, whether Jack Welch's radical CEO ideas were more like the experiments of his younger chemical engineering self. Works in theory, not in practice. Especially when you blow the whole thing up. But what do you think? Was Jack Welch a maverick whose ideas stand the test of time, or did he do the ultimate rank and yank by getting away scot-free? Let us know in the comments below. And if you like this video, be sure to check out our video on the battle between Thomas Edison and Nikola Tesla. And don't forget to like and subscribe to keep on learning how history works.